On today's episode of the show, we're explaining why Louisville edge rusher Ashton Gillotte will be a national All-American this upcoming season. All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Louisville.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on? Welcome into this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The sports have stopped sporting like we want them to, but fear not. This summer, FanDuel has been hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. On today's episode of the show, we are previewing the pass rusher department ahead of the 2024 college football season. We just talked about interior defensive linemen. Now we're going to the pass rusher side, defensive end, and the outside linebacker spot for the Cardinals. We'll begin by explaining why Ashton Gillotte will be a national All-American this season, and he raises the trajectory of the team by himself. We'll also identify who could start at the Leo, that outside linebacker spot. Names like Myles Jernigan, Adonijah Green, TJ Capers, etc. And then we will talk about who we think will step up after the departures of last season, this offseason, the transfer portal, etc. But I would be doing this program a disservice if I didn't discuss what a lot of fans probably think. But it's time to make this the norm of discussion. I know that these are lofty expectations, and if you listen to the show, you know I'm not a huge fan of lofty expectations unless I feel like they can be backed up. Ashton Gillotte will be a national All-American this season. The fact that he even decided to come back to school for his final season and stay with the program is monumental. He went from being already one of the best pass rushers in program history to having the potential to be one of the best players in program history overall once he steps foot off campus. Last season was a great year for him. You lost Yasir Abdullah and Yaya Diaby, and questions were, how can Ashton handle being the guy? And he answered those questions by recording 11 sacks in 2023. He had a career-high 45 total tackles, doubled or almost doubled his tackles number, had 3 forced fumbles and 1 fumble recovery. The 6'3", 275-pound defensive end was electric. He was good enough to receive first-team All-ACC honors. He received the 3rd most votes behind ACC Defensive Player of the Year Peyton Wilson from NC State, and I think he received 2 less than him and 1 less than Clemson linebacker Jeremiah Trotter. Now, both of those players have thus gone to the NFL. Gillotte returns, and again, he's going to raise the ceiling of this team. More on that here in a second. Multiple 2025 NFL mock drafts have pinned Ashton Gillotte in the first round. Like, there's a ton of hype surrounding him. He's a guy that is receiving a ton of discussion and credit, as he should. He hasn't received it soon enough, but nonetheless, it does seem like that praise is starting to come around. His 11 sacks for the Cardinals ranked 9th most in total sacks in a single season for the Cardinals. He was 8th in the country this past season in sacks, 3rd most in the Power 5, and he is the top returning Power 5 defensive player with the most sacks. Another year of getting better, another year of learning Ron English / Mark Hagan's defense and getting to know Jeff Brohm's scheme, and he's going to have an even better season than he did last season. Now, will he statistically get to that 11 sack number? I think he's going to. I think he is, because I think that the Cardinals bolstered the interior of the defensive line, like we talked about on yesterday's show. Excuse me. That's going to take a little bit of the pressure off of him. It's going to take a little bit more of the attention off when you have guys like Thor Griffith, Des Tell, Jordan Girard, Jared Dawson, you name it, manning the inside of the Cardinals' defense in the trenches, to where you can't really afford to spend all your time worrying about Gillotte when you have other players that you have to focus on if you're the opposing offense. And then the edge on the other side, I think it has as much depth, if not more depth than last year. You're still going to have guys step up. But nonetheless, I think it's time that we call it how we see it. Ashton Gillotte is one of the best defensive players in the country. I would be really surprised if he's not a player that lands on the National All-American list. Now, is he going to be first team? We'll see. I hope he is. That would be fantastic. But I do think he's going to make one of the lists. Now, not only is he going to be in All-American consideration, but his return automatically raises the trajectory of this Cardinals team, because look at the positions outside of quarterback. Let's put quarterback to the side because quarterback is obviously the most important position. A star edge rusher is one of the top 3 most valuable players on a team, comparable to, let's say, maybe a star left tackle. You could argue that they're probably just as important because there are different levels of ability to affect the game in different ways. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but it's pretty clear that with quarterback, I think that star left tackle, star edge rusher are the other most valuable players that you can have on a team. You could argue, star number 1 cornerback or star middle linebacker, star interior defensive lineman. I think it's the edge rusher spot. You've seen defenses like one specific instance that I look at is I think it's 2018 Kentucky with Josh Allen. And Josh Allen had a fantastic senior season. He changed the whole dynamic of that defense that had some struggles in other personnel spots. But the fact that he was so good on the edge, wrecking havoc all the time, it sort of masked over those inefficiencies and helped that Kentucky defense get to the next level. I think you're going to see sort of the same rise for Ashton Gillotte. I think Gillotte can move inward to the interior of the defensive line in some situations. He can stay outside, but nonetheless, the native of Boca Raton, Florida, is going to have a fantastic season. And the fact that Louisville is able to bring him back is key, because at the beginning of last year, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is the last year that we're going to see Ashton Gillotte. This is the last year that we're going to see Quincy Riley. And to be able to get both of these guys back, man, it is such a great problem to have. And looking at the rest of the pass rusher group for the Cardinals, I'm really glad that Louisville brought him back. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad group by any stretch. I'm just saying that there's a lot of question marks, and what those question marks are, we'll discuss in the second and third segment. But how does Gillotte take that next step? That's the thing for me, is that Gillotte was great almost all season long. I mean, there were certain instances to where I felt like the whole pass rush kind of struggled, where Louisville really wasn't getting home on opposing offenses. But I think that Gillotte can improve by just continually progressing, refining that skill set, refining the footwork, making things happen on the field. It felt like early on, Gillotte just wasn't getting home as much. Now, he was getting the pressures. It just wasn't relating to sacks. And he wasn't, putting those numbers up in the box score. And I think some people were kind of frustrated. They're like, well, yeah, Louisville, people say Louisville has a good pass rush, but the numbers don't reflect that. Yet you sort of just have to watch the games. Now, the players do have to get home, and you do have to get some sacks, but they were getting the quarterback hurries. They were rushing the opposing offense. They were making the opposing quarterback go through his reads a lot sooner than he wanted to make. And we saw that early on in the season when Louisville started out 6-0. But at the end of the year, the Cardinals kind of struggled down the stretch to get that consistent pressure. I think that Gillotte just has to sort of spearhead that movement for the Cardinals and just be the star that we know he is. And I think that team will gravitate towards his level of play. And being able to get him back could be ultimately the difference from making and not making the inaugural 12-team college football playoff. That is to be determined. Louisville obviously has to win a lot of games in 2024, which I do think that they will. But you can't, overstate how important this is for this team, for this program, and for, the opportunity to take your program to the next level. But for the Cardinals to have a great pass rush, they have to get some help opposite of Gillotte. There are 3 candidates that I have in mind that could start at the Leo spot, the outside linebacker opposite of Gillotte. And I'll identify who those players are here in the next segment after we tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, it's that time of the year. We're in the dog days of summer. The sports have stopped sporting like they used to. But, however, FanDuel has let me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood because they're offering daily boosts and bonuses, which I have been taking advantage of. I hit a really nice 6-leg parlay over the weekend. Juan Soto's caused me a lot of pain in my Houston Astros fandom, but he made a little bit of amends with the solid hit that ultimately won my parlay over the weekend. So I guess shout out to Juan Soto. I don't think we're on good terms yet, but maybe every relationship can be repaired. But nonetheless, I digress. Do yourself a favor. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And before we get into the next segment, I do want to once again ask you all to do yourself a favor. Do yourself a favor here. Turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And continuing on along into this Tuesday edition of the show, once again, thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. One of the main questions that I have in regards to how good this pass rush can be for Louisville really all center around who is going to step up outside of Ashton Gillotte. I don't think it's a lack of talent per se with the Cardinals. It's just really the lack of maybe overall experience and Power 5 experience altogether. Sorry, seem to be having some issues with connection and Wi-Fi. So if the recording starts going in and out, I do apologize for that. Everything seems to be taken care of. So let's knock on wood. Hopefully everything is squared away. But nonetheless, like I mentioned, I think it's more of an experience issue. Someone has to step up or multiple players have to step up. I think there are 3 guys that we can look at as being the go-to pass rusher outside of Gillotte. And I think that we also have to clarify that it's not just these players aren't just pass rushers. You can throw them into edge. You probably throw them into the edge position, but they will have to defend the run as well. And that will be a portion of the responsibilities that they have to do well. Outside of Gillotte, 3 players. The first one is Myles Jernigan. When the Cardinals lost Tyler Barron to the transfer portal, it sparked the Cardinals going to the portal to get multiple players that can play either on the interior or that outside linebacker spot. One of those guys is Myles Jernigan. Jernigan has been with California for the past couple of seasons. 6'3", 235-pound edge rusher. He's going to play his final season of eligibility with Louisville. He has technically, I would say he's been a starter. He's played the majority of games, played in all 12 this past season, 5 starts, had 20 total tackles, 2.5 of those are for a loss. He had a sack, a fumble recovery, a pass breakup, and tied for second on the team with 2 forced fumbles. Had a better 2022 than he did 2023. He had 51 total tackles in 2022 and 4 sacks. But the Grand Prairie, Texas native, I feel like is going to come to Louisville with his ability to rush the passer, and he's going to play a lot of snaps, especially early on. I think that he, in my opinion, is going to be the starting outside linebacker at the Leo spot if I had to predict it on July 23rd. He is extremely explosive. He has a good amount of twitch and bend. I think that he can ultimately be a good run defender in the ACC too, and that is a definite plus. And sort of like Stephen Herron, Herron probably a little bit better coming to Louisville than Jernigan was. But I know Jacob Lane, host of From the Pink Seats podcast, he raves about Jernigan's skill set. He believes that he's going to come to Louisville and have a breakout type of season. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that Jernigan could be the guy to basically fill the Stephen Herron role, where Herron wasn't a phenomenal pass rusher, but he was really solid in defending the run and sealing the edge. I think that Jernigan, if Louisville wants to take that next step forward as a pass rushing team and having better edge presence, Jernigan not only has to defend the edge as well as Herron did, but he also has to rush the passer, I think, just as good, if not better. And this is where having Ashton Gillotte changes your whole defense, is you have a little bit less attention being focused on the opposite side of your star edge rusher. Having Thor Griffith means that you're not going to see a ton of double teams. There's going to be a lot of one-on-one opportunities. Now, granted, you're going up against the left tackles, but ultimately I think that Jernigan is a guy that could definitely benefit from having Gillotte, Thor Griffith, Des Tell, and company. He is the lone transfer at the Leo spot that I feel is going to get a good amount of time in a potential starting situation. The other two are younger guys that were ranked really highly in high school, but haven't really, I mean, they played one season basically. So this is going to be an interesting year for both of them. The first one is 6'6" edge rusher Adonijah Green. He was arguably, depending on the recruiting service you looked at, the highest rated commitment in that Flyville 23 class. And that is saying a lot because it was a really, really good class, one that a lot of people want to pretty much be the norm for the Cardinals moving forward. But nonetheless, he had to wait his turn. And that's okay. That's pretty understandable. But the 6'6" native of Ellenwood, Georgia, has drawn some raving reviews from those inside the program throughout this offseason, raving about how he has developed. He's gotten stronger. He has, transformed his body a little bit. And I think he's ready to take that next step. Is he going to be a pass rush specialist at the next level at Louisville? To be determined. But I think he has a well-rounded enough skill set to be able to be an every down player on the Cardinals defensive line. I think Adonijah Green is the future at the position. It's just a matter of whether or not that is this season or if it's going to take some time. Even if he doesn't start right away, I think Adonijah is in line to continually see an increase in snaps as we progress throughout the season. I've mentioned time and time again, he's one of like the main players on defense that I'm thinking, okay, this is a guy I'm watching really closely because I want to see what he's able to do. Ranked really highly out of high school just because he sat behind Herron and some other guys this freshman season. I mean, it doesn't, take away from the talent he has. And sometimes it takes some time. Most times it takes time for guys to, develop into the player that they need to be. And I think that Green is definitely a guy to look for. The other one is the main wild card. You could argue that this is like a top 2 most talented guy on the team as it relates to raw ability. That is TJ Capers. Capers was a top 10 recruit out of South Florida before he got hurt, and he fell down the rankings since then. There were people saying, oh, he's overrated. Truthfully, I don't necessarily think that to be the case. I think that Capers, there's a lot to like with the skill set. I think mainly it's deciding where he's going to play. I know there were some that thought he might be an inside linebacker. I don't necessarily think that was going to be the case. I think he was going to be an outside linebacker, not as a defensive end, but as a Leo, 6'2", at least 230 pounds from Columbus High School. Redshirted last year due to injury. He was an early enrollee, and he spent the year getting healthy, learning the playbook. I forget who it was. It might have been Ron English. Oh, gosh, it's going to drive me nuts now of which assistant coach said it, but they were basically like publicly trying to fuel TJ Capers to give more effort and just continually get better, which it feels like since that comment was made, there hasn't been any problems. And he has practiced extremely hard. He's gotten better every day. And if that raw talent is able to click, then who knows what you could see from him this season. I think this year's probably a season where you're going to see him as a pass rush specialist, and that's okay. But if there is a player talented enough to force the coaching staff to play him the majority of the snaps, there's only a couple players that fit that mold on this team. And one of those is TJ Capers. And if he can, rise to the occasion, who knows what could happen with him at that Leo spot. And I think a lot of Louisville fans would be extremely hyped if that were to happen. One of the main things that I worry about with this group is just who is going to step up. In the Leo spot, there's a lot of talent, but somebody's got to step up. Outside of Ashton Gillotte, someone has to step up. And there's a couple guys, couple transfers. We'll talk about Richard Kinley, Renee Conga, Tremel Logan, what the status is of Mason Reiger, can Ramon Puryear take the next step forward, and more coming up here in the next segment. And again, as we head into the final segment of the show, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Global, free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Also, for your second listen, tune in to Locked On Canes, hosted by Alex Dono. He has done a great job of talking about a future ACC opponent for the Cardinals later on this season. And if you want to get to know, I got the hiccups. If you want to get to know about one of Louisville's pretty highly sought after opponents, then tune into that show. But to conclude this edge rusher, pass rusher position preview of the show, we're going to talk about who steps up at defensive end. I think it's worth noting that at this point, we're sort of not really knowing what the status is of Mason Reiger, who had a career-high 22 tackles last year, 5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 6'4" native of Hoffman Estates, Illinois. He has missed spring with an injury, and things are being kept really close to vest. I don't know what it is that he's dealing with, and I don't know what the availability is moving forward. It sounds like the consensus is that he's going to miss some time. Now, how much? Will he miss the entire season? I'm not sure. Will he miss a portion? I don't know. But at this point, without more concrete information, I don't really feel comfortable discussing the position yet with him included until we know, a little bit more on the injury status. But nonetheless, we wish him the best with whatever he is dealing with. But somebody's going to have to step up behind Ashton Gillotte. And Jeff Brohm went to the portal and got multiple guys to try to do that after spring ball. 3 transfers. The first one is Richard Kinley. I think he's probably, in my opinion, going to be one of the 2 battling for the backup defensive end spot. He had really good production for Middle Tennessee State. Spent the past 5 seasons there. Veteran guy that will play his last season. He had close to, I think, 80 total tackles, a career high 3 sacks this past season, 3 pass deflections, 6'3", 235 pounds from Memphis, Tennessee. I think you're going to see him get a ton of opportunity in the rotation. He would be my go-to backup alongside of Ramon Puryear from Eastern High School. Like Kinley, over 4 seasons in college ball, he has the ACC experience, 21 total tackles to go with 4 sacks. I think Puryear and Kinley will be the two that go head-to-head trying to compete for those snaps. That's why we mentioned yesterday that Puryear could see some snaps on the interior of the defensive line, because I truly think he's good enough or too good to not be on the field in a good amount of snaps. So you have a battle between Richard Kinley and Ramon Puryear for that backup spot, but there's a couple of other guys, 2 more transfers. Tremel Logan from South Florida, who had 33 total tackles in 2023. He had 1.5 sacks, 4 pass deflections, had a pick 6 from Miami, Florida. I think he's going to be in the mix. Renee Conga, who doesn't really have a ton of production from his days at Rutgers, but he is a veteran guy that's going to be able to bring some depth to the position, 6'4", native of Canada. And then not to mention the younger players that are from the area, Micah Carter, Selah Brown, Sadiq Clemens, Wu Spencer, all 4 that can either play on the interior or go out wide onto the edge. There's so many different players that makes this edge position one of the top ones to watch in fall camp as we head into the preseason, because of there's so many players in the group that seemingly have the talent to be ACC level guys on an every snap basis, but there are only so many spots to fill. And like wide receiver was a couple years ago, you have some quality candidates. It's about rising to the occasion and having certain ones separate themselves from the others. But the main takeaway that I would implore you all to remember from this episode is that for the Cardinals pass rush to be better than it was last season, where it sort of went incognito at times and disappeared, you have to get more production outside of Ashton Gillotte. Now, the interior will help with that, but guys like Myles Jernigan, Adonijah Green, TJ Capers, Richard Kinley, Ramon Puryear, Renee Conga, Tremel Logan, the younger guys, that's over 10 players in this group. And if Louisville can't find one guy or a couple guys to step up and fill the void, then it's going to be a long season for the Cardinals in the trenches as it relates to getting after the quarterback. But nonetheless, I have high hopes for the unit, as I have high hopes for the defense as a whole. We move on in our next episode. We will discuss the inside linebackers. Now, I should really preface this by also putting the ones at the star position in the mix as well. So inside linebackers, star position, like guys like Ben Perry, potentially Tamaria McDonald, Antonio Watts, etc. That will come up on the next episode. But that's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.